Thomas Watson, when he was 22, he had a failing butcher shop, and he went to NCR, the National Cash Register Company, to return the cash register for the business that was sort of going under. And when he was there, he talked himself into a job.
And it was said this was where the concept of ever onward came from, this experience of jumping into something new, completely different from what he'd done before.
When he joined NCR in the early 1890s, he had no formal training in a business sense. He learned everything on the job. But he definitely got the attention of the powers that be at NCR, and he moved from Buffalo into Dayton, Ohio, where the business was focused, and met John Patterson. John Patterson was the founder of NCR, and he took a liking to the young Watson and decided that he was going to try to mentor this kid.
He was put on this team with kind of an unconventional focus. It was looking at the future needs of users. So not the things that users needed today, but the things that they might need in the future. And this was sort of the beginning nugget of some of the later things that Thomas Watson would do.
Watson was very much interested in learning the lessons of John Patterson and bringing them over to IBM when he joined in 1914. He had this idea of really reshaping IBM. It wasn't even called IBM at that point. He was inheriting three distinct businesses: computing scale, tabulating machines, and time recorders. They were actually three distinct business lines that did not have a lot of connection to each other. He felt, Thomas Watson did, that there was an element of siloing going on between these different competing areas of the business, and he wanted to fix that. So he felt if there was more synergy between what those two visions of products were, not just the technical side of it, but also the practical side of it, what could be actually marketed, then there would actually be a growth opportunity for IBM going forward. And so he started the Future Demands initially as a committee in 1922, helmed by James Bryce, who was the chief engineer of what was called then the CTR company. And by 1929, that committee became a department within IBM led by Clem Arrett. He believed that you have to continue to reinvent, reimagine, rethink, recalibrate, all of the re's. And so at one time, tabulation and punch cards and electromechanical accounting machines was the bread and butter of this business. It wasn't always meant to be. And so by working with folks like Clem Arrett and folks like James Bryce, Fred Carroll, he enlisted all of these engineers and talent from around the country to harness their talent, harness their vision, harness their ideas to be able to create something for the future that was going to be long-lasting.
You see future demands come in and out of IBM's history, especially around times of big social change. So as LJ talked about, in the 1920s, it started to sort of germinate under folks like Clem Arrett, who's in the songbook. It went away during World War II and came back around this question of, are we a calculator company or are we a computer company? And at the time, IBM thought of itself as a really successful calculator company, and their clients were calculator clients. And computers in 1955 were big and slow and mostly used by academic researchers. They weren't necessarily something you would bet the company on. This is something that they had to think through. Are these computers part of the future? Are these part of the future world that our users will be working in and living in?
Watson did not necessarily see there was a market for it. However, folks like Stephen Dunwell, who was involved with the Future Demands department, definitely did. And he pursued this rigorously. This machine that is behind me was called the Stretch, and that's sort of a colloquial term for the IBM 7030. It was IBM's first transistorized computer, or in fact, transistorized supercomputer, I should say. Stephen Dunwell, who was really an innovator beyond measure at IBM, he pushed to have this computer become a real focus of us going forward. It wasn't necessarily widely believed. It wasn't universally acclaimed that this was going to be successful. But folks like Stephen Dunwell and folks like John McPherson, they believed that computers were the future.
One of our first computers that we created was the 701, the IBM Defense Calculator. And the fact that one of our first computers, sort of the predecessor to the 360 and to this beautiful stretch machine, that we called it a calculator, I think says a lot in terms of how we thought of ourselves as a company and our identity. We were a calculator company. And it's so interesting to think through that those conversations had to happen of, what does it mean to become a computer company? What does it mean to shift into that space and into the world that we think our users are going to want to be working and living in, or the world that's going to be coming, to them, and creating machines for that? What does that mean decades later for us as part of that legacy?
Future Demands was something that actually emanated from NCR. One of the things that John Patterson instilled in his company was a sense of culture, what it meant to be an employee of that business. And he believed that if people felt that there was a larger mission, a larger reason for the work that they do, it wasn't just to, collect a paycheck, that they could in fact make a difference in the world. And Thomas Watson believed that IBM would and should be a great world institution beyond just the borders of the United States, that it should be a global institution that should have wide impact on the future of not only business, but also on humanity as well. So IBM has been constantly reimagining itself. And Watson believed that there was always an opportunity to learn from the past. One of his famous saying was, analyze the past, consider the present, visualize the future.
IBM has continually transformed itself, and I believe the practice of futures design is an essential vehicle for reimagining our future. Just as IBM had a rich design history in the mid-20th century, and we revived that past and now have today's IBM design program, within IBM systems, we are returning to our IBM Z Poughkeepsie roots, which was actually the birthplace of IBM's speculative research practice. Now is the right time for us to renew that focus. And I think particularly with the pandemic, it underscored just how uncertain and dynamic the future is and how important it is for businesses to investigate future possibilities from a human perspective and using research to do that, to best shape a future where our businesses can maintain relevance and also advantage.
I think when it comes to thinking about the future needs of our users, we've all had sort of an embodied experience with the fact that there's a lot of uncertainty, especially lately, but also when we're building things. If you and I were to have a workshop today and figure out exactly what the pain points of our users were and the best way to address those pain points, it might be 2 or 3 years before we could actually release that. So what's going to be innovative on the day that that's released? What's going to fit into the needs that our users have on the day that that's released? I think a lot of times people hear futures design and think, we're going to predict one version of the future and sit around and wait and see if we were right and hope we were right. But it's not like that. We're thinking about many different versions of the future. There's versions of it that we might be really excited about. There's versions of it that might be a little bit terrifying. and having this discussion with teams to think through based on the trends that we're seeing across different parts of the industry, and understanding which things are likely to happen, likely to have an impact. Based on those things, what do we as an empowered team want to be able to actively choose to build towards or away from? I think that's a really exciting opportunity, and it's a really good time for teams to be thinking about it in that way instead of sort of waiting to inherit whatever future we get. So if you look at the loop that we all know and love, the observe, reflect, make, the framework for futures design is Foresight, Insight, Action. And they fit really beautifully together into that loop. They're very similar things, just sort of echoes of each other. And when you think about futures design, a really core piece of it is the idea that nobody owns the future. It's nobody knows the future, nobody owns the future, and in a way that makes it a really great sandbox to work in, where you can think through different possibilities. You can think through what is an opportunity that our team really wants to pursue or really doesn't want to pursue, and be able to make choices depending on that.
The Future Demands Committee and department wasn't always successful, but in a sense it was. In other words, it was an opportunity to fail. They developed a lot of ideas. There were blueprints created. There was designs produced, but they weren't always successful. And in fact, many times they weren't. But that was the whole vision of it. It was giving this team not only the flexibility, but the freedom to fail. And when they succeeded, it was really successful. Folks took risks, folks believed in the people, folks believed in the ideas, and ultimately it bore fruit.
I'm very excited about the futures design work we are embracing in our business for several reasons, but I will highlight two main ones. The first is the opportunity to expand our design capabilities in daringly creative ways, yet also in calculating ways, applying methodology. And also to have an even broader collective and contributors, from strategists to scientists to sociologists. This type of research, with its more imaginative and experimental approach, I think is particularly exhilarating for designers, as it offers us a chance to tinker a bit more than we maybe can in some of our day-to-day work, especially in the areas of ideation and prototyping. And I think, profoundly thinking about the classic as is to be framework and really shifting that dichotomy and thinking through this futures design lens. So we're exploring beyond the to be now and leaping truly into the what ifs. And secondly, I'm excited about what futures design will bring to the business, really the strategic value that futures design will bring to the business. We'll be focusing on futures design as a means to inform our spring strategy, as well as our longer term direction of where we'll be taking our business. And while we will continue to work on the more imminent work, right, such as the work that's related to products releases and roadmaps and all those types of things, futures design will charter a new territory, a new path, thinking through future forecasting and visionary scenarios. And I see this way of design contributing to our business as a really decisive milestone in the maturation of our program, and also the value that design practice can bring to business and also to the people that we serve.